The views and opinions expressed by the guests of the Inspira Podcast do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of any agency of the United States government or any organization, public or private.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Inspira Podcast, hosted by your girl, me, Erika Mueller Chen. I'm an international development specialist with over a decade of experience leveraging the amazing power of sport to promote peace and positive social impact. My career has allowed me to live in Europe, Southern Africa, and Latin America. In 2022, I accepted an offer for my dream job in sports diplomacy. And I also became an employee family member to a U.S. diplomat, aka an EFM. This podcast is all about inspiration and career advice. Each episode, I'll interview an inspirational global changemaker working in sport for development, social impact, or the diplomatic service. This series is perfect if you have interest in breaking into one of these sectors, or you've already landed that dream role and are keen to learn from thought leaders. Enjoy today's episode and stay inspired.
Really exciting because we're being a part of history. We're creating a legacy. I want to be everything that I didn't want in pursuing an opportunity with a team early. I want to create something that is not being done, that's not so cookie cutter, that's not just for show, but that really people can say, wow, that moved the needle.
Welcome, friends. Today we are here with Miss Shanell Mosley. She is the Director of Community Relations and Executive Director at the DC United Foundation, where she oversees the organization's community and social responsibility strategy to help make the DMV a better place for future generations to come. Shanell formerly served as the Deputy Director of Sports Partnerships at UNICEF USA, where she managed relationships with U.S. sports leagues, teams, and professional athletes dedicated to educating, advocating, and fundraising to help the world's most vulnerable children. With over 13 years in the sports philanthropy space, Shanell's personal mission, in her view, is to create social change and positive impact using sports. Shanell received her bachelor's from Bentley University and master's from Northeastern University. She also serves on faculty for the Sports and Entertainment Impact Collective and is on the board for the Bentley Mosaic Alumni Council. Shanell, how do you do all of this? I'm like, where do you have the time? Welcome, by the way.
No, thank you for having me. It's always funny when people read your bio because you're like, okay, this is so awkward because I think we're, especially in the nature of like what it is that we do, which is social impact, we're used to like tooting other people's horn and shouting from the rooftops about others. But I'm very much blushing. But I also know that it's taken a lot to get to this place and just excited. So I try to use as much time that I have to do things that mean something to me. So including this podcast and just this conversation with you as a whole, just excited because I think the more that we can share our personal stories, hopefully that can inspire somebody in some shape or form.
Because I've called this podcast Inspira, not only is it about career advice, but it's about inspiration. And so I'd just like to share a little bit of why my guest inspires me. And so I might make you feel a little bit awkward again, but Shanell, you inspire me because from what I understand in your journey, you've really been in the trenches. Like you've moved your way up at UNICEF USA. You served in AmeriCorps before that. And now you've transitioned to Washington, D.C. with a professional sports team. And you really just have these different angles and views of understanding how sport can be used for good. And so I really admire and respect that. And I'm excited to dig in. So thanks again.
Thank you very much.
So maybe I can just ask you to give us, in your own words, a brief overview of your career sports journey and perhaps any key moments that really led you to sport for good.
100%. So I think that it's always funny when people start this journey and they talk about the very beginning to now the current. But I think that in this case, I'll work backwards. I essentially oversee the entire DC United Foundation and the community relations team and strategy here. And I'll start with I didn't always have the desire to work for a professional sports team or league. And quite frankly, it's because sometimes there's this stigma in this space that teams will only do what they've continued to always do. And so where I saw the opportunity, what excited me to lean into this space is having the ability to create something from scratch and to do what others are not doing or just aren't doing enough of. And so as much as I hold others to that same standard, I also hold our team to that same standard. So I often talk about that what we're doing at DC United is incredibly special. I think what we're building is special. The people that we're building it with is incredibly special. And so having the opportunity to work with a professional MLS team to use their platform for the most good is really exciting. And so building everything from scratch, from the strategy to the programs, to the events, to the partnerships, to the collaboration is what a lot of my day-to-day entails. And I'm sure at some point in this conversation, we'll dive deeper into that. But I always, like I mentioned, always didn't want to or saw myself in this space. I saw myself using sport as a vehicle for social change, which started very early in my upbringing as a military kid. Every 2 to 4 years, we were moving all around the country, the world, you name it. And so I've always been a true child of the world, but sport was that one constant thing for us. No matter where we were, there's just so much power in a ball and bringing kids together and uniting people and teaching you basic core values. And so I think the essence of sport just creates a lot of opportunity for people as individuals, people as a community, and just as a greater collective to drive things forward. And so I dug a lot of my career into the nonprofit and the social impact space, and that has looked many, many different ways. So while some people think the path to working for a professional sports team looks really traditional, I take a lot of pride in mine not looking as traditional. My entire career has been dedicated to the nonprofit space, whether that was being a Girl Scout troop leader, working as an AmeriCorps member, teaching. I was an educator in Boston Public Schools for many years, directing an after-school program focused on math and the power that it has in determining the success of a young person in their college years. And so I have really touched a number of different places throughout my career, but the one constant thing continued to be sport. Working with professional teams or leagues or individuals, professional athletes in some shape or form to help them figure out how to use their passion and their purpose to drive change. And so that's what kind of all brings me back here, weeding through the UNICEF years of working with athletes, teams, and leagues in a meaningful way to use their platform to help children in 190 countries and territories. And so it's been an exciting journey, and I'm just really grateful for it.
Thank you for that overview and just condensing over a decade of expertise into a couple of minutes. I know it's not easy, and emphasizing again how your non-traditional path, right? And how you take pride in that. I think that's so important and important in all of these stories that we're telling, that everyone's path is different and really special in their own right. And so, Shanell, I'm wondering throughout your career and thinking about your skills or what I like to call your superpowers. I've been taught that there's two really important aspects to that. One is identifying your superpowers, and another is marketing it and storytelling. So in terms of your career, what does that look like? How have you identified your superpowers and then marketed it?
Identifying my superpower. I think there becomes moments throughout your career where people tend to gravitate towards you for certain things, and some of which you might either realize you have and some of which you don't. Being a military kid, being a kid that played sports, being the oldest sibling, I often fell into a place of just true leadership, but through passion. You can't teach passion, but you can teach a lot of things. And so a lot of the work that I've done, I've been incredibly passionate about. And so that continues to drive me. That's my why. And so I connect with people through my shared passion, and often that's what creates partnerships and collaboration. And so a lot of people think there has to be this playbook to partnerships and collaboration. And while there are best practices, I think a lot of it ties into your core, your ethos, your values, your character. And so what I really reflected on through my years, especially through my studies, through the professional spaces, I wanted to make sure that the person I show up as in the professional space is the same person that I show up with in my regular life. And essentially it shouldn't feel like I'm taking the mask off. And so for me, my passion is continual across both of those things. And I love connecting with people, exploring creative ways to partner, collaborate, think outside of the box, create solutions. If somebody has a resource or a platform or a space or a capability to help meet a significant need of another, while also on the other side, working with groups or individuals that have needs. And I think a lot of the nature of the sports and the impact space is always thinking about how can we drive or create the greatest change. And often the thing that's prohibiting that growth or that success or that change is something that they might be lacking. And it's not because it's not available to them. It's just that maybe it's not attainable or reachable in a way that it might be for others. And so how do we take these other groups or individuals that have those things and connect them with those that maybe don't, to make their lives easier too. So there's a lot of power in just bringing people together. And I think when you're a passionate person, or you just understand how you fit into the bigger picture, sometimes it's grabbing everybody up together and bringing them to the same space. And then that's where the magic happens. So I think that's a big part of my superpower.
I love that. It's like a big puzzle, and you're like a puzzle master, but really that ethos that you mentioned. And I know you've talked about vulnerability in other interviews. I know two things that you mentioned are important to you kind of before this conversation is one, the importance of relationships to partnerships and collaboration, and two, that authenticity. So I'm wondering if you have any examples of how that's looked in your career, where that really allowed you or your team to prosper at UNICEF or these early days now at DC United?
I think that through history, there was a lot of negative perspective of vulnerability. And I think if you listen to like individuals such as Brene Brown, she's now making it cool to be vulnerable. And I think that society is so programmed to think that if a person is asking for something or is in need of something, that there's like a underlying reason, right? That there's almost like a negative connotation or rationale to why something is happening. Or even if you think about the structure of negotiations, people always traditionally think it's like, I won or you won. It's not that like, can we move side by side and both win? And so I think that by allowing myself to show my vulnerability, it creates a space of comfort for others to also feel comfortable to do the same. They're like, wow, there's this person that is an executive in this space that is being her authentic self, that it allows for me to show up and to also be my authentic self. And even I heard Tracy Ellis Ross cite this the other day, where she takes pride in like giving people around her the opportunity to be their own selves. And so as a result of it, they say, wow, you have great energy, or you seem like such a great person. But by being around her, it helps make others feel like they love themselves or they celebrate themselves. And so really, I just try to show up as myself because it allows other people to take that barrier down. Us as humans are programmed to create safety and barriers. And so what I hope is that when people either work with me in this space, that they can show up in that way. And that allows for like the mind and even just thoughts and capacity to go beyond your wildest dreams, because there's not the prohibitive factor of like, do they have my best intentions at heart? Like I'm very forthright and even asking questions to seek to understand as opposed to challenge.
I could totally see you as a teacher, like you mentioned. I could totally see you in your AmeriCorps days. I mean, I know it was back in the day, but just like who you are and your energy and your passion for like humans, right? And just that creating that space is just you. So even just in a couple of minutes, I'm like, yeah, that's Shanell. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that because I have not taken the traditional route through sports, some of the like blockers that can happen through sports is if you're only, and this goes for any industry, if you're only exposed to that industry and that industry alone, you only have a certain perception of what it has to look like. And so it's been really fun taking my experience from being an educator, from being a person and working on the nonprofit side of things that's working with major brands, teams, and leagues to partner. And so now I have a different perspective of when we partner with individuals, because I'm thinking about what's going to make this a win for them, as opposed to just thinking about how are we going to check our box so that we have a win. Now, if we partner with somebody and if I feel like they're too nervous or afraid to say, hey, that doesn't really work for us, or hey, our youth are on vacation, but they're trying to force it. I give them the opportunity to say, hey, if you really love this idea, but just the logistics of it don't work well for you at this time, let's think about what's going to work for you. Because what I don't want to do is, especially since there's limited resources or capacity on your side, I don't want to ask you to do something that's not going to be a win for you. So let's figure out what's going to help make it a win, and then let's go at it together, right?
Shanell, I'm wondering in terms of your career trajectory, and before we dive into some UNICEF examples or DC examples, how do you think your personal or professional priorities may have shifted throughout your career? And how has that influenced your approach to your work or your approach to job opportunities?
You know, as a kid, and my mom refers to me sometimes like, this is my Mother Teresa daughter. I always had this like innate desire to help others. But I think as a kid, sometimes you're not really sure how you can do that as a kid. And so I didn't know that there were careers in this space. I was always fascinated by business. And so for my undergrad, I did pursue focus in business and global perspectives. But it was during my time there that getting that business acumen, it actually exposed my thinking to a little bit beyond. We're realizing that sometimes in this impact space, it's the visionaries, it's the passionate people, and that sometimes what we're lacking is that strategy, right? That bigger thinking to understand like what's the ROI, or where's the strength, weaknesses, and opportunities, all those like coined business terms. And so it was right around my collegiate years that the light bulb flicked, that I said, you know what, business could be good, used for social good. And so now taking this institutional knowledge that I have with the passion that I have for sport, for global development, for working with youth in some sort of way, combining those, I created and curated a path for me, essentially like pulling in a little bit of this around sport, pulling in a little bit of this around education and youth engagement, pulling in a little bit of this. And so by kind of collecting these things together, that's what helped me build the space that I wanted to go down. So while people went off to college, after college, they went to work for the Big Four and finance and accounting, I went off to do AmeriCorps because I was like, okay, and I can get my master's for free doing this Mass Promise Fellowship. I was like, this is amazing. And so I will tell you, it was in that transition where others were so excited to be securing major first job deals. I probably at that time made $12,000 a year. And it was the richest I ever felt in my whole life. And that's when I knew the decision that I had made to take the information I knew to further like learn more, but also get that direct like hands-on experience was the right path. And it's super ironic because now at this point in my career, a lot of people I went to college with or met in those earlier parts of my educational time are now looking back and saying, okay, we did the finance or the accounting track, and now we're thinking about pivoting into a career that has purpose. And so sometimes I take a lot of pride in my purpose is helping others find their purpose, whether that's coaching an athlete to understand how they have the ability to create change using their platform, or teaching an organization how we can layer elements of impact into every single partnership we have. And so showing that there's so much that we can do just with our everyday actions, but also about being super intentional. It's really exciting to look back because I feel like I always kind of knew what it was I wanted to do. I just had to create it. So just because what didn't exist doesn't mean that it wasn't possible.
Amazing advice and insights and talking about richness, right? In the ways that it resonates with you, that purpose, that fulfillment, and it's different for everyone. So I really appreciate that reflection that you just gave. Thinking about UNICEF and thinking about your journey there, over 12 years at UNICEF USA in New York City. If you remember, how'd you get your foot in the door there?
Man, my time at UNICEF was like my dream time. I loved and still do. I'm like their number one fan, everything that organization does, because they're creating true impact and it's measurable, it's attainable, it's clear, and it's out there. I started my journey with UNICEF during my undergrad years. I had interned for the organization loved it so much doing that one semester. I came back for another semester, even after, and that actually led into my next step, meeting, and understanding the Mass Promise Fellowship, where you get hands-on AmeriCorps experience, also get your undergrad degree. I stayed on and involved as a professional volunteer. And through the years of me being a teacher and educator for a school program and out of school program specifically for student athletes, I loved having that direct impact. But one of the barriers and the challenges that I realized is that sometimes it's incredibly difficult to create systematic change while you're in the trenches. So being an educator, I thought, well, maybe I want to be a principal. Maybe this now sparked me to becoming a principal. And then I even veered off just a little bit into a space where I was working as an admissions role. And I realized like I missed working directly with athletes. So around that time where I was just like, I don't know if I made the right switch or the change, UNICEF had created a role around their sports partnerships in conjunction with a program that they were just launching, UNICEF Kid Power, which empowers young people to make a difference through their everyday actions. And they both get to impact local communities and also provide therapeutic food for kids around the world. So they really saw the value in using relationships with local sports teams and individuals to inspire those young people even more. So they created this role, and I was like, this was made for me. Like I literally felt like at that point in my life, it was like my dream job. And so at that point, I went through the process, and I even remember having a little bit of like imposter syndrome or doubt that maybe I wasn't the right fit, because on paper, they were looking for somebody that worked directly for a professional sports team or league. And I remember when HR even called to give me the offer, I had notes that were ready to ask questions on how I could have improved my, interview process on my application. And they were literally calling me to extend the opportunity for me. And what I think about set me apart is I maintained all of those relationships that I had through my internships years, through my volunteering years. I kept them in the loop of my journey. They've connected me with people and industry professionals throughout my career that led to other opportunities. And now they're still some of the closest people that I know. And that also opened a new opportunity for me to carve a lane for myself. And I think within a year of me being there, my supervisor had left. And that kind of put the organization in a position to think about, what does this department look like? And I had shown really great proven success in the role, which they then expanded my role in the team, and eventually grew into me overseeing the sports partnerships team. I feel like incredibly blessed to have met the coworkers, the colleagues, and even the athletes, the teams, the leagues, and collaborate with them, many of which I still stay in contact with. But it's interesting how one small part of your journey impacts a really big part of it in the larger picture.
And bringing it back to those relationships, like you said in the beginning, like you not only create the relationships, you nourish them and maintain them, so that when, they see Shanell's name on something, I mean, like younger Shanell, they'll be like, yeah, like she's up to this, and I know what she's been doing, and she has a great reputation. I feel good when I hear her name, because she's been giving me that feeling and those updates. It's super important.
It's amazing to have a tribe that supports you and uplifts you, and even just is ready to go to bat for you.
Quick break here to highlight that there are currently 5 Inspira Podcast episodes available for your listening pleasure. Episode 1 provides my background and motivation for starting the podcast. Episode 2 is with Miriam from Egypt, a former pro footballer who broke into the sector through an internship. Episode 3 is with Steven from Jamaica, who founded a cheerleading organization that prevents violence and empowers the members of the LGBTQ population. Episode 4 is with Shanell from the USA. She's the executive director of the DC United Foundation, the Major League Soccer team in the US's capital city. Episode 5 is with Ben from South Africa, and we talk about the evolution of the sport for development and peace sector. New Inspira Podcast episodes will be released every Tuesday, starting on January 31st. If you like what you hear, please give Inspira 5 stars on your chosen podcast platform and write a kind review. That would really make my day. Thanks, and back to the show. Do you have any highlight moments from your 12 plus years there? I know you worked with partners like NBA Africa, obviously other leagues and teams, Naomi Osaka, and going to Haiti with her. Like what stands out to you, whether it's big name things or just special moments?
Um, I think that I've had the ability to travel to the field with a number of special individuals. I think one of my most favorite human beings is Dikembe Mutombo, and getting to see his passion for humanitarian work, understanding his journey, right? A lot of people don't understand or know that Dikembe didn't always seek out to play basketball. He's actually was very interested in pursuing his degree and focused around medicine, which he's now turned into opening hospitals and just resources in the DRC, and just seeing who he is as a person. So traveling with him internationally to the field, along with other NBA players that are newer to this philanthropy and this impact space, and seeing not only how they respect him as a player, as a human, but also as a humanitarian. And so I often hear people asking me questions like, who's your favorite athlete that you've worked with? And, why do you like this so much? But I think when you see a person's light bulb click on, or that they are bought in and know the importance that, like, every child deserves the right to basic necessities, and the opportunity for a kid to be a kid. I think there's such a cool moment in helping to support them, because now they can use their platform to create change. And I know Dikembe also is on our UNICEF board, and working with him, we just built a really great relationship, and also with his family. I call his mom Auntie Rose, and she's been able to teach me life lessons, or even just discuss like things that we all experience in life. And so I'm just grateful for those moments. Even the NBA family, NBA Cares family is such, I'm so close to them, and I just respect them and love them. And it's fun to cheer them on from another league perspective. But I also take a lot of those learnings and working with, we did a collaboration with the NFL around Super Bowl 50 and making it the most philanthropic Super Bowl in history, working with the NBA and NBA Africa. I've traveled to Mozambique, Senegal, Ethiopia, Angola, South Africa with them, and exposing players to our work directly in the field, because now it's their duty to take it back and to speak about it. So CJ McCollum, Rondae Hollis Jefferson, Joel Embiid, traveled with him to Cameroon. And so grateful that they can then trust me as a subject matter expert. And I always say to them, as they're like understanding their space, would you trust a stranger off the street to teach you your jump shot? And usually they're like, no. So I always try to encourage like athletes or individuals, like, well, would you trust a stranger off the street to teach you how you make a difference in like humanitarian aid focused work? And they're like, no. So sometimes like we have to own where we're not a subject matter expert, and work with people that have that knowledge, understand what the greatest needs are, and then essentially can help connect things to meet those needs. And so a lot of memories during my UNICEF years, from the events to the travel to different speaking opportunities, and helping athletes use their platform for good, such as Jeremy Lin, especially around the COVID pandemic time, and speaking out on mental health, anti-Asian violence, working with Lori Hernandez, who is a rock star through and through, speaking at our summits and just educating other young people on how they could create change, and how she's essentially been able to use her platform to be so outspoken and to drive change as well. So many things.
Well, you said there's no playbook for this, but I feel like if there was, like, you would have written it, because you're naming off all the, like who's who in the space, and also just the importance of education from one person to another, regardless of who that is, like the subject matter experts. It also sounds like you were so happy there, and they were so happy to have you, and you shaped things, and it shaped you. And I'm really curious, however comfortable you are in sharing about your transition now to Washington, D.C. and D.C. United. What were some of the things that went into that decision, from being a deputy director at UNICEF USA to now being the director of community relations and executive director at the D.C. United Foundation?
It was kind of wild how it all happened, but I think I always, and I encourage other people too, like, no matter where you are, you're kind of always thinking about that bigger picture, and how this fits into you tackling your big goals. During the pandemic, I think that everybody experienced it in a whole different way. It obviously gives you way more time to think about things. And I think I often ask myself, whether it was inside the pandemic or prior to it. Like, am I doing the most good that I can possibly be doing? I feel like at UNICEF, I got to a place where I, quite frankly, had done a significant amount of stuff to set the bar high, but had a little few inquiries that were happening that were like, hey, have you ever thought about being an executive director of this nonprofit or this foundation? And I was like, huh, interesting. Like, I think in my mind, I have visioned it maybe way more down the line because I was really comfortable. I was passionate. I was turnkey. And so that would mean taking on a challenge, right? And testing yourself in a new way. And sometimes we kind of like when it's comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I could do this because I'm feeling very comfortable. But I also was ready to step up that bar. And I'm at a place in my life that I'm able to take on a challenge. I'm able to dedicate that time. I want to lift it up. And so I really wanted to be a part of a legacy. And I felt like I fulfilled that legacy at UNICEF.
Okay.
So now that means, like, how do I use my skills that I've had received to date to use them in another space? And so I had actually sent a big group text out to my network, a few select individuals, specifically outlining what I kind of envisioned for my life and what I was looking for. And it was then that I received a text back that's like, call me. And it moved very fast from conversations to talking about what exactly I was seeking or wanting, and wanting to create legacy and to build something. And through those conversations, also discovered like my incredible interest and background in fundraising and philanthropy. And so while the role might have initially been described through the director lens, essentially there was hope down the road to bring back the DC United Foundation. But I think it was during those conversations specifically about what I was seeking, what the needs were at DC United, we were able to discover this is an alignment. And like the time frame that it flew was so fast that I'm also a woman of God. So I feel like when God has a plan for your life, there's no, like, he has the timeline, not you. And so I'm just grateful because it just allowed for me to step up. And so looking at the success that we've had to date, just within the 10 months of me being here, and looking at what we're planning for the off season and for next year, it's really exciting because we're being a part of history. We're creating a legacy. The feedback and the energy that's around the office is just incredible. I really love my colleagues. And I said it before, but what we're building is very special. And I want to be everything that I didn't want in pursuing an opportunity with a team or a league. I want to create something that is not being done. That's not so cookie cutter. That's not just for show, but that really people can say, wow, that moved the needle. So when you see me posting on LinkedIn, I'm shouting from the rooftops. I am tooting our horn. And I remember very, very early in my career, somebody said, if you don't toot your own horn, who's going to dance to your music? Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm my number one fan. Yeah. I mean, my mom, quite frankly, might be.
She's and Dikembe's mom. Yeah.
Yes. Dikembe's wife as well. And so, yeah, I have an incredible tribe here. Our team is always supporting our events. They see the vision. They're on for the ride with me. And so it's really, really exciting. And I feel incredibly blessed to have this opportunity for an organization to trust my vision and plan.
Thank you, Shanell, for sharing that, and just the story of how you put it out there, right? Like, you were in a good place, and those are kind of the best times to be thinking about a transition, because it's really challenging if you don't want to be somewhere and you want to get out. So when you want to be somewhere and you're like, oh, let me put some feelers out, I think that's just a really...
I thought it was going to be like a year from
right.
Like no time. So
like, we got you. Yeah. And also something that you said a few times now is just because something doesn't exist doesn't mean you can't do it or can't be it.
Mm-hmm.
So I really admire and respect that about your journey and what you shared.
No, absolutely. Thank you. We're all still figuring it out, but I think like if we show up with the energy that some of our counterparts do have in this space. So I just like try to just give myself a pep talk and say, like, girl, you're doing a good job.
You got that ringtone. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm curious also about that transition in terms of some of the differences in what you're doing now versus what you were doing at UNICEF, whether that
Mhm.
comes down to size of your team or the
Yeah.
budget that you have. What are some of the differences, whether it's like things on paper or just, the everyday tasks? What does that look like for you these days?
I think like UNICEF as an entity, right? The goal is to educate, advocate, and fundraise on behalf of the world's children. And so the entire organization is really set up to support those three focuses. Over at a team, it took me a little while to kind of understand like, wow, there it's like a puppet and there's a lot of different
Mm,
moving pieces, and you have to understand all of the different business functions and how your job also fits across all those business functions and how theirs weaves into yours. Where at UNICEF it was kind of like, all right, we all knew our lane and we're running towards it, and we like it just kind of flowed in like this. Whereas on a sports team, I think like understanding the business helps you understand that bigger picture. So it almost feels like similar but different. And so I was able to take a lot of my learnings and experiences throughout my career, and especially at UNICEF, but also to understand the new like form of business and how you could add and create value across units. So I work with our corporate partnerships, and we're securing multi-year agreements with partners that are also having multi-year commitments to community initiatives. So
mhm.
thinking in a more sustainable way. So taking the learnings from UNICEF and sustainable approach, identifying key needs, meeting those needs, those types of things, and weaving it into this way. So that way we're not in a situation for every year for an initiative or program, we have to seek new funding. Finding value-based aligned partners has been really helpful. Working with our ticketing and sales team as we're growing our database, every community initiative or event that we have, we're capturing that information because we want to stay in touch with those people. We want for them to continue to be in touch with us on what it is that we're doing, because maybe their first entry point into our world of DC United is through one of our community events or initiatives. And so now they've become a fan because they see how we show up in our community. On the other hand, we might have individuals show up to our movies at the pitch event that our events team puts on, but now we know that they're more inclined to support our DC United Foundation because they care about the community. It's understanding how each of the business entities operate and how we help them achieve their revenue goals, or even just like increasing our awareness and our visibility. So I work closely with marketing, showing them how we could even better enhance our brand, but through using our
Mm,
community side and lens,
mhm.
engaging our season ticket members and our supporters groups because they're really passionate about the work that we do with DC Scores, which is an official charitable partner that's helping young people form teams that are focused on soccer and poetry and service. And so um it's so similar but so different. I think at the beginning I was certainly like, I've been working with sports teams, but once you're really on the inside of it, you
Mhm.
see it in a different vantage point. But I also think that I've been able to look at a lot of our objectives along in a different way, which is exciting that the organization is also incredibly open to innovative approaches. Every single teammate, whether it's a ticketing and sales, our corporate partnership, our events, our data and our analytics team, our marketing team, our comms and content team, they're so open to trying things in a different way that it's like just further reminds me like this is why I'm doing what we're doing. Like this is what we're here for. We're hosting All Star next year, MLS All Star, and just excited how we hope to be setting that bar high for others, and approaching things in different ways. Like just because that's how something's always been done does not need to be how we always do it. And challenging each other to say, hey, if this is not working in this way, let's reconsider it in this way, and having those honest conversations to help us like not just do what we're always used to doing.
And Washington, D.C., in terms of sports culture, like the last 5 years, I mean, even when I lived there, kind of the last 7 years, there were some really cool things happening. In
Yeah.
2018, the Washington Capitals won the Stanley Cup for NHL. In 2019, Washington Nationals won the World Series for MLB. And that same year, Washington Mystics won the championship for WNBA. And more recently in 2021, Washington Spirit won NWSL, National Women's Soccer League. You've got these championship teams in Washington, D.C. Got to be a good feeling as well, like to have the geography and have kind of
Yeah.
the population that has an appetite for it, where you don't kind
Yeah.
of have to reinvent something or like convince people that like soccer or football is
Yeah.
interesting, right? So I think that's a nice
100%.
bonus in terms of the DC location.
Yeah, and I mean, we're in the nation's capital. Our name is DC United. And I think there's that name in itself means like we're all united we're united for all. Like, and I think that we genuinely want to make the DMV a better place because we exist. That is my ultimate goal. If we look at anything like because we are here, we've helped create or drive change. And so it's exciting to be in the nation's capital where it's truly like an integrative melting pot of all the people. We have government, we have military, we have so many transient people that have arrived here. We recently started working with some of the migrant youth and families that have relocated here to DC. And so we want everybody to feel like they're our neighbor and we are their neighbor. So part of being neighbors is we got to show up for each other.
Well, is there anything from your career that we haven't covered yet, kind of before we get into the fun, more lighthearted questions, any experiences or insights that are kind of on your heart that you wanted to share?
I think one thing I do want to touch on is like the importance that mentorship has had on my life and how I also try to show up as a mentor for others. You don't have to have formal settings to be a mentor or to give feedback. And I'm always like seeking out input from others. And so like, I think the value that has had on my life has just helped me remind me that I should be in spaces that even in my head, I think I maybe shouldn't be, or even working with others as they're navigating their careers or big decisions, because I've had the same every step of my way. And so by one, if you should have somebody guiding you and giving you that counsel and that input. To always, no matter where you are in your life, you can always be in a position to mentor, coach, or support others. And it doesn't stop just at you. That means like whether or not you have been in the industry for more than 14 years, whether you are in your first year. And so I often bring along my team for different speaking engagements or events, because just because I'm their supervisor on paper does not mean that I'm the only one that has input. And we spoke to a grad group yesterday, and I brought along my teammates as well. And I think they have just as much insight and value to add as well.
Mentorship really is a key, especially thinking about sports, right? How competitive the sport industry is, or even finding opportunities for women to work in sports as well as women of color. And I was going to ask you kind of in a few minutes in our advice section, but let me just ask you right now, like, what are your thoughts on that? Or more specifically, what advice might you give for women or women of color really looking to break into sports and perhaps sometimes feeling discouraged if they don't see that?
Yeah, I think, Cindy, forgive me for not remembering how to properly pronounce her name, but she's at the Mavericks. I've listened to a lot of her panels or discussions. And I think one of the pieces of feedback I remember her sharing years ago is to find somebody in the space that's doing what you hope to do one day. And you don't even have to necessarily reach out to them and pick their brain, but like learn from them, read the articles about them, listen to the podcast about them. Now, where people get stuck is you just like try to embody them as them. But what you want to do is take those qualities that you admire and do them 10 times better, right? If so, people can come and learn from my career and they're like, wow, I really love what Shanell did around this and this. Because a lot of the success that people have, it's not new. These aren't new things that people are doing. They probably interpreted it or like created a new version or modified it from somebody else that they learned something from. Now it's up to you to take that, to understand the qualities, what pieces of it, learn those things, grab them, add them to your toolbox, and now do them 10 times better. Because if women of color, girls are doing the same stuff that I'm doing now, 10 years from now, that means you missed the point. Like the point is to take, like what you learned from those human beings, whether you've been admiring from afar or following their journey, but then doing them even bigger and better. And so I think us as women, we sometimes get stuck feeling like, oh, let's just be quiet, or let's not like disrupt the space. And disruption of the space doesn't have to be this like loud, like in your face. Disruption of the space is like, I'm going to talk about what we're doing because I know what we're doing is excellent. And when I hold ourselves to a high standard of excellence, and I want people to know it and to see it so they can take it and exemplify it or learn from it for themselves and do it 10 times better. Like if I see other girls that are taking an idea, or individuals in the space that take an idea that I've interpreted it from somebody else too. Like, and if they do it exceptionally well, slow clap, like I am going to root you on. So doesn't have to be new or different. Just do what others are doing well, that are operating at a high level, and crush it.
Dropping knowledge and also doing it like in your own way, right? Obviously you want it to be bigger and badder and better, but like in Shanell's way. And so that can also be empowering for people who are like, Erika, like I don't know how to do it better than Shanell did in 10 years, but like do it your own way. And that's how you're going to add flavor. And that's how you're going to be authentic and be kind of following some of these nuggets of knowledge that you're giving us and make things happen.
Yeah. And some people, that the people that really know me, they know I'm an extroverted introvert, right? But when I show up in the spaces that I'm in for this work, I want you to feel my presence. I want you to feel my passion. I want it to like leak out onto your paper as you're taking notes. But I also don't expect for somebody to show up in that same exact way that I do, because that may not be their authentic selves. And so it's also having self-awareness to know, like, okay, maybe that's not the magic sauce or the magic ingredient in my recipe, but maybe yours is tied to a different angle, and like leaning into that, like you said, in the way that's like authentic to you. Don't have to replicate it in the way that I'm doing it if it doesn't feel authentic to you.
Now that we know more about our guest's career journey, the rest of our conversation will allow us to have some fun and get to know our guest on a personal level through some rapid-fire questions. We'll then start to wrap up with pointed questions focused on advice and how our listeners can transform interest into action. Enjoy the rest of the conversation. Tell us about your favorite food.
Oh, tacos.
Yeah?
I am such a taco person. I can eat tacos for every meal of the day. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite taco place, either in DC or New York?
DC has a lot of great taco places. Union Market has some places, La Cosecha. I love Delena's. I recently discovered El Destino inside of La Cosecha. And then there's one more. Inca Social is another one that I love too. So highly recommend all of those places. They are all minority owned. And the tacos just speak to your soul.
I love that. Well, if you're ever coming to Mexico in the next 7 months, hit me up in Guadalajara because we've got tacos for you, Shanell.
I do frequent in Mexico as well. My grandfather is also Mexican. And so for me, I just appreciate that part of our culture, and I just enjoy traveling there as well.
Oh, I didn't know that about you. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, my family is incredibly multiracial.
I know you're a Steelers fan. Tell me why,
Yes.
or tell me your favorite player or favorite moments.
I'm actually traveling this weekend to go catch the Steelers play in Miami.
Woo!
I was always a Polamalu fan, but my mom and her siblings were born and raised, and their uncle was a Steelers fan. And so we, growing up as kids, I was a Steelers fan. My brother was a Washington Redskin fan, now the Commanders. And so it was a divided household, but it's always fun on the holidays and game days, because there's a lot of trash talking in our family in the most kindest way. But
of course. All right, you have a day off from work. I promise it's coming. What are you going to do to relax?
I love traveling. I love binge watching Netflix. I love taking like random excursions. A few ones that I did this summer were to the sunflower farm, checking out new wineries, reading books. I love like blasting my music and cooking, taking walks with my dog, or visiting my family, or spending time with friends. I always love a last minute spontaneous adventure too. So it could be like a day trip, whether that's exploring something new here in DC or going to visit some of my best friends up in Boston.
What's your dog's name?
Bambino.
Bambino, tell me more.
Yes, Bambino is a 12-year-old Yorkie. I adopted him when he was about a year old, and he is the best.
I believe it. Thinking back, reflecting in retrospect, anything or any advice you would have told your younger self?
I would tell my younger self to speak up. Speak up until others listen. speak up in a way that reminds you that your voice matters.
Any advice further for people interested in breaking into the sport for social change, sports philanthropy, sport for good?
One of my mom's favorite things is like, be like Nike and just do it. And I think that's something that I always listen to in my head. You can listen to podcasts and you hear these great tips. You can go to conferences, but like the best space is actual physical connection with human being, right? You can get all the subject matter expert. That's what we're supposed to be doing, but put it into practice by connecting with people, throwing your name in the hat for opportunities, asking for feedback when maybe you may not have got these. Maybe you weren't one of the finalists, or maybe you weren't the final candidate selected. Whatever it is, like always seek to receive that feedback. And now it's on you to put it into practice. And so I always say to people, like, you can complain, you can talk about all things that you shoulda, coulda, woulda done, but it doesn't mean nothing unless you actually put it into practice and you hold yourself accountable. Because it's on us to take the responsibility for our life and our vision and our journey. It's not on anybody else. So you're in the driver's seat.
That's what it's about. And Shanell, is there one thing you hope listeners remember from our conversation today?
Be yourself, and in the most truest, dearest, and authentic way.
How can our audience support you or your work moving forward?
You can check us out, dcunited.com/community. That's our community page. If you want to check out about our DC United Foundation, it's dcunited.com/foundation. And I'm on LinkedIn. I always post. So sometimes people just discover me or follow my journey by checking me out on LinkedIn. Shanell Mosley. That's it.
It's a good follow, I promise you. That's how I've been like keeping tabs on what you're up to once you went to DC. Exactly.
So awesome.
My final question that I love to ask every guest, because this is about inspiration. Shanell, who or what inspires you?
Man, this one is easy. My mom. My mom lost her mom at a very early age due to breast cancer. So every year she's been doing this, or the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Walk, creating awareness, raising funds. My mom was in the military. She's retired military, works for the government. She's retiring next year. She worked 3 jobs growing up. My mom worked really hard to create the life that my brother and I have had. And my brother and I went through both undergrad and grad school. And then she completed her bachelor's degree only a couple years ago as an adult. And she stayed committed to it little bit by little. And so while I'm so grateful for her sacrifice, it also inspires me to create a life for myself and for my future family to come, that they don't have to, like, the point of us is to break our generational curses and to even make our ancestors proud. And I look forward to those proud moments where my mom gets to come see me in action. She is the team's #1 fan. People see my mom on game days helping to pass out giveaways, or when we have our United We Serve volunteer service program. She's usually at every single one of those. And so it's just really exciting because she's been my brother and I's #1 cheerleader, and we're also very much her #1 cheerleader, but she's just a phenomenal woman.
Shout out to Shanell's mom. And Shanell, it's just been a pleasure and a joy. Thank you for your time and your sharing your story, your learnings, your advice, all the above. I just know that you're going to continue to do incredible things, and just feel privileged to have this time with you and play a little part in sharing your story, getting it out to even more people. So thank you.
Thank you, Erika. I appreciate you. And I also appreciate you using your platform for good to shine light on these things. I think as crazy of a schedule we all have, like, this is so important. So thank you, truly.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Inspira Podcast with Erika Mueller Chen. I really hope you enjoyed the episode and found it useful. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and resources. Specifically, my LinkTree is there with tons of awesome information. Feel inspired to take action today? I've got 3 action steps you can take right now, because you know your girl likes calls to action and the number 3. So here goes. Number 1, follow the podcast on your chosen podcast platform. Number 2, share your feedback with me through the listener survey listed on that LinkTree. And number 3, tell just one friend about this podcast so they can give it a listen too. And do I have any overachievers out there? I've got a bonus action step, which is to consider supporting me and making sure this passion project prospers. So, number 4, follow the link to buy me a coffee. That would be pretty amazing. Until next time, stay inspired.